When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw wasn't the pale green hospital ceiling or the IV line taped to my hand. It was my son, Evan, standing at the foot of my bed with a manila folder clutched in his hands. No flowers, no smile of relief. No, "Mom, you scared me half to death." "Just paper. Just sign these, Mom. It's for your own good." His voice was low, careful, like he thought speaking gently would make me more likely to obey. He didn't even sit down. He just stood there, looking at me the way a banker looks at someone applying for a loan, measured, polite, calculating. Outside the half-open blinds, the morning sun was spilling into the room, but somehow it didn't touch him. I shifted against the pillows, my legs still heavy from whatever sedatives they'd given me. My throat felt like sandpaper, but I managed a small smile, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. Because the truth was, I'd been ready for this moment, not just today in this bed, but for months. The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence between us. I could hear the squeak of shoes out in the hallway, the rattle of a breakfast cart. Life in the hospital goes on, no matter what's happening inside a room. I reached out a hand, and Evan immediately stepped closer, thinking I was reaching for the pen clipped inside the folder. But I wasn't. I rested my palm lightly on the blanket instead, studying his face. The same face I'd kissed goodnight for years. The same brown eyes that used to light up when I baked his favorite chocolate chip cookies. Now those eyes were different, sharper, restless, a little too eager. "Papers?" I asked, my voice still rough. He hesitated, glancing toward the door. "Just some documents, so I can take care of things while you rest, pay bills, handle the house." The house? That word was like a stone dropping into a deep well inside me. I took a slow breath, pretending to be too tired to press for details. My pulse was steady, but my mind was already moving, fitting pieces together like an old jigsaw puzzle. Because this wasn't just about paying bills. I could see it in the way his knuckles tightened on that folder, in the way he avoided meeting my eyes for more than a few seconds. "You should rest," he said quickly. "We'll talk later." And then, almost too quietly, "Vanessa's downstairs getting coffee. She's excited to see you." I let him think I was drifting back to sleep. I let him place the folder on the tray table by my bed, as if he was leaving a bouquet. But the weight of it sat there like a loaded trap. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, I turned my head toward the window, watching a single maple leaf flutter loose and drift past the glass. Outside, the world was carrying on like it always did. Traffic moving, people walking, leaves falling. But here, in this little white room, something had shifted. And I knew. When I left this hospital, I wouldn't just be going home to recover. I'd be walking back into a storm I'd been pretending I didn't see. A storm I now intended to face head on. Because while Evan thought he'd caught me at my weakest, he didn't know the truth. I'd been preparing for this longer than he could imagine. And he had no idea. The deed was already mine alone. 2 days after the hospital released me, I was back in my own kitchen, leaning against the counter while the kettle hissed on the stove. The house smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I kept tucked in the linen drawers, and under that, the warm, woody scent of the floors my late husband, Mark, had refinished one summer when money was tight, and we couldn't afford contractors. He'd sanded every board himself, bare-chested in the July heat, grinning at me through the dust. That's the kind of home this is. Nothing about it came easy, but everything in it has a story. From the outside, my life probably looks simple. I'm Helen Ward, 64, a widow for going on 12 years now. In our small Midwestern town, people know me as the lady with the garden, the one who grows prize-winning dahlias and tomatoes you can smell from across the yard. I bake for the church fundraiser every spring. I keep the front porch swept. I never miss voting day. But there's a quiet weight that comes with being the person everyone assumes is doing just fine. After Mark passed from a sudden heart attack, I held this house together with sheer stubbornness. There were months when I worked 2 part-time jobs, cashier at the hardware store in the mornings, bookkeeper for the feed supply at night, just to keep the mortgage paid. I packed my son's lunches while reviewing overdue bills, sewed Evan's prom suit from clearance fabric, and told him it was custom. I never told him I sold my grandmother's wedding ring to cover his first semester of college. And for a long time, I believed that kind of sacrifice meant something, that it bought loyalty, that it built a bond you could count on. Evan was my only child, and I raised him with everything I had. There were hard years. His tempers as a teenager, the wrong crowd, the false starts. But I clung to the good moments. The summer evenings tossing a baseball in the backyard. The day he called me from college just to say he missed my roast chicken. Then came Vanessa. They married 3 years ago in a vineyard 2 counties over. It was all white roses and champagne, a glossy kind of celebration I'd never been part of. I remember watching them pose for photos under an arbor, her dress catching the late afternoon light, her hand resting lightly on his chest. She looked like she belonged in a magazine, not in the small-town life we had here. From the moment we met, Vanessa was polite, overly so. Her smile had the shine of someone who's calculating the next move while they compliment your casserole. She worked in real estate before transitioning into something vague involving property development and lifestyle branding. I mean, she never said it outright, but I could feel her looking at my home the way you'd look at a plot of land you meant to flip. The house is a Victorian with wide eaves and a front porch that sags a little on one side. It's been in the Ward family for 4 generations, but Mark and I restored it board by board. We chose the buttercream paint for the siding, the hunter green shutters, the wraparound porch swing where we'd watch summer storms roll in. It's not just a building. It's the backdrop of every important chapter of my life. But lately, I've started noticing the way Vanessa's gaze lingers in certain rooms, the kitchen especially. She'll glance at the cupboards like she's picturing quartz counters and open shelving, like my sturdy oak cabinets are holding her back. Evan, for his part, plays peacemaker. He assures me Vanessa only wants what's best and talks about planning for the future. But sometimes his words slip, like the day he said, "Mom, this house could be worth a fortune if we modernized it." Modernized. That's their word for erasing every mark of the life I built here. The first week I was home from the hospital, they came by just to help out. Vanessa breezed into the living room carrying 2 lattes, her hair smoothed into that impossible shine you only see in shampoo commercials. She set the drinks down on my coffee table without a coaster. "We were thinking," she said, crossing her legs neatly, "that it might be time to consider a smaller place. Just something easier for you to manage." Evan nodded, as if this idea had come to him in a dream. "There's a condo downtown, Mom. Elevator, no yard work, right next to the farmer's market. You'd love it." I smiled because I've learned that showing your cards too soon only makes people push harder. "I like my yard work," I said. Vanessa's lips curved politely, but her eyes didn't match. "Of course. But think how nice it would be not to have to worry about repairs or the stairs. And," she added, her voice sweetening like she was dropping in an afterthought, "it's a seller's market. You could get a fantastic price for this place right now." The way she said it, like the house was already halfway sold, sent a thin line of cold through me. Later that afternoon, while they looked for a missing phone charger upstairs, I stood at the bottom of the staircase and listened. Vanessa's voice was low but sharp. "If we can get her to agree before summer, the developer will cover closing costs. We could flip it in 6 months." Evan murmured something I couldn't hear, and then she said, almost impatiently, "She's not getting any younger, Evan." "Sooner's better." I moved quietly back into the kitchen, gripping the counter until my knuckles ached. When they came down, Vanessa was all warmth again, asking about my garden, complimenting my new curtains. But I noticed her eyes flicker toward the locked desk drawer in the corner of the dining room, the one with Mark's old files, and I knew, in that moment, that my time to pretend nothing was wrong was running out. That night, I opened that drawer. The folder with Mark's lawyer's letter was still there, still sealed. My fingers brushed the envelope flap, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Some things you hold on to until the moment they matter most. The week after Vanessa suggested the condo, the tempo of their visits changed. Before, they'd show up on Sundays for coffee and pie, making small talk about traffic and weather. Now they arrived unannounced on weeknights, all efficiency and clipped smiles, like a pair of realtors preparing a listing that didn't yet know it was for sale. They started with helpful things. Vanessa brought a label maker and a stack of banker's boxes. "Just decluttering," she chirped, sliding my wedding china into tissue like it belonged to a future she'd already designed. Evan measured the dining room with a laser device, mumbling words like load-bearing and open concept, as if the bones of this house were obstacles to his plans. I tried not to show how it landed. I made tea. I smiled. I said, "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." But I could feel something tightening under my ribs, a rope pulling slowly, steadily. On Wednesday, I walked into my bedroom to find Vanessa kneeling by my cedar chest, the lid lifted, her fingers sifting my keepsakes, Mark's Letterman patch, photos curled by time, the lace handkerchief my mother carried down the aisle. She looked up, startled, then recovered with a practiced laugh. "Oh, Helen, I was just trying to find a safe place for these," she said, as if safety could be measured by proximity to her hands. I crossed the room and closed the chest. "They're safe where they are." Her smile thinned. "Of course, I just thought, with everything going on, we could make things easier." Easier for whom went unsaid. Evan drifted in a few minutes later, sniffing the air. "Do you smell gas?" he asked, too brightly. "No," I said. "It's the new mulch out back, the clean kind." "Ah," he said, glancing at Vanessa. He didn't smell anything either. I could tell. The exchange was theater, performed for my benefit. On Friday, there was a knock at the back door. A man in a blazer and expensive boots stood on my stoop, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Ward? I'm Ross, friend of Vanessa and Evan. I develop properties with vintage character." He said vintage the way people say quaint before they tear it down. I hesitated, then stepped aside because Midwestern politeness is a reflex. He walked through my kitchen as if he were in a showroom, tapping the walls with his knuckles, peering out windows, murmuring to himself about lot depth and setbacks and secondary egress. When he reached the front parlor, he paused, taking in the fireplace mantel Mark and I stripped and stained, one winter when outside work was impossible. "These could be preserved," Ross said absently, like a hunter admiring a rack before mounting it on a different wall. By the time he left, my hands were shaking. I went out to the garden and pushed my palms into the dirt until the tremor stopped. The soil was cold and forgiving. It has a way of absorbing a woman's fear without judgment. The next morning at the grocery store, my neighbor Ruth leaned her cart toward mine. "Saw your Evan here yesterday," she said softly. "He looked busy." I kept my voice light. "He's always got a project." Ruth's eyes softened. "You call me if you need anything, Helen. I mean it." That afternoon, I found a box missing from the hall closet, the one with the family documents, birth certificates, deeds, the mortgage satisfaction letter we'd framed and then tucked away because pride is better quiet. I called Evan. "Did you take something from the closet?" He sounded surprised. "Just your old insurance papers. The policy's outdated. I'm getting quotes." "You don't have to," I started. "Mom," he said, cutting me off gently, the way you quiet a child who's asking too many questions. "Let me handle it." After we hung up, I opened the dining room drawer where Mark's letter sat between the placemats. I took it out, weighed it in my hand. The envelope had yellowed at the edges. his name in the old lawyer's neat script. I ran my thumb under the flap, stopped, and set it back, sliding the drawer shut as if tucking a secret into bed. On Sunday, I made pot roast because that's what you make when you want the house to smell like reassurance. The meat simmered low and steady, filling the hall with something like memory. When Evan and Vanessa arrived, Vanessa carried a bouquet of white lilies, funeral flowers my mind supplied unhelpfully. She set them on the table with a flourish, then glanced at the mantel, as if picturing it bare. We ate at the old oak table. Evan told a story about a client who'd stiffed him on a consulting invoice. Vanessa laughed a little too loudly, filling the spaces where the old Evan would have asked me about church, or Ruth's grandson, or whether the tomatoes survived the late frost. They were here, but not with me, like two people visiting a museum where their favorite exhibit was potential. When I reached for the gravy boat, Vanessa's hand shot out, catching my wrist. "Careful," she said, "you're shaking." I set the boat down. "I'm fine." "Are you?" she asked, sweet as sugar. "Because on Wednesday you left the porch light on all night. And the day before, there were 3 burned cookies on the sheet pan. 3, Helen. Mark used to say a burn was a badge of effort. Vanessa made it sound like a symptom. Evan cleared his throat. "Mom, we're just worried. After your episode." "My dizzy spell," I said. "In April." "Right," Vanessa said. "And the hospital this week. It's a lot." The way she said hospital, like it was a revolving door I'd chosen to spin through, cooled the gravy in my veins. Evan reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin blue folder. It looked like the one he'd brought to my hospital room, the way a trap looks like any other step on a well-worn path. "I had a friend draft a simple care arrangement," he said, sliding it toward me. "It just authorizes me to pay bills, handle repairs, make decisions, if, I repeated, though I could feel the word already blooming like a bruise. "If you need help," Vanessa supplied, eyes bright. "Everyone does sometimes. Think of it like a safety net." "Why does a safety net need my signature?" I asked. Vanessa laughed softly. "Because nets work better when you agree to use them." I could feel my face doing that thing it does when I'm holding something fragile. The features go calm, my voice drops, and every sentence turns into a way of buying time. "Well," I said, "it's Sunday." "We don't sign things at Sunday dinner." I smiled. "It's a rule." Vanessa's smile flashed and vanished. "We should make an exception." Evan's jaw moved, a small grind. "Mom, we're trying to help." Later, when I was washing plates at the sink, I heard them in the living room. The TV was on low, football murmuring like a distant ocean. Vanessa's whisper cut through anyway. "She'll never agree if you let her drag this out. She needs to move before winter. This place is a liability." "I'm not pushing her," Evan said. "She's my mother." "Exactly," Vanessa said, and the tenderness in her tone scared me more than any sharpness could have. "Which is why you have to be the one to protect her from herself." I stood there, holding a wet plate over the sink, watching the water pool and drip off the edge. All those years of protecting him from himself, curfews and call-ins, taxiing to practices, forgiving and forgiving, and now he wanted to return the favor by rewriting my life. The next afternoon, Ruth called. "You up for pie night at church?" she asked. "I made pecan, your favorite." "It's Sunday," I said, then laughed at myself because the calendar had already turned. "Yes," I added quickly, "I'll be there." The fellowship hall smelled like coffee and powdered sugar. I'd always liked the folding tables, the way they forced people into conversation. About halfway through the evening, I saw Vanessa glide in chic and out of place among the casserole dishes. Evan followed, scanning the room. They found me near the window where the fly tape hung. "Mom," he said too loudly. People turned their heads. "We thought we'd catch you here." Vanessa produced a sleek leather folder from her tote. "We brought a notary," she said, nodding toward a woman standing in the doorway with a stamp and a bored expression. just in case you wanted to get this out of the way." A hush fell. Church quiet is different from other quiet. It's layered with listening. Ruth stepped closer to me, her hand hovering at my back. I smiled at the notary, at the stamp poised like a gavel. "I'm not signing anything tonight." Vanessa's mouth tightened. "Helen, please, we're trying to avoid complications." "Complications like me living in my home?" I asked. "Like you leaving the stove on," she shot back. A small, shocked ripple moved through the room. "Evan found it last week. The flame was still lit when we arrived." I blinked. "I turned it off." Vanessa looked at Evan. He hesitated a fraction too long, then nodded. "We smelled gas, Mom." There it was. The little rearrangement of truth that feels like a kindness to the person telling it and a theft to the person living under it. Ruth stepped forward. "Helen's careful," she said, voice steady. "She taught me to light a pilot back when mine kept going out." Vanessa's smile sharpened. "We appreciate the community's support." Then, to me, with a softness that tried to pass for love, "But communities can't sign legal documents for you." Someone coughed. Someone else set a plate down a little too loudly. The notary shifted her weight and stared at the linoleum. I felt heat climb my neck, not because I was afraid, but because humiliation is a hot thing, and it tends to spread. This was supposed to be a safe place, pie and coffee and laughter over uneven slices, and now my son and his wife had turned it into a courtroom. Evan held out a pen. "Please, Mom, for me. For me." The words had been a key once. Now they were a pry bar. I took a step back. My vision went a little bright around the edges. "No," I said. "Not like this." Vanessa exhaled, long and theatrical, then turned to the room with a small shrug as if the crowd were a jury that needed educating. "We're just trying to make sure Helen is safe," she announced. "She had a health scare. She's vulnerable right now." The word hung there. Vulnerable, like a label pinned to my blouse. I heard the scrape of a chair. The notary, sensing a storm without a paycheck, slipped away. Ruth moved to my side, and I could feel the tremor in her hand. "Enough," I said quietly. "This is enough." Vanessa's eyes glinted. So sign. My mouth opened, but the room tilted just slightly like a boat catching a swell. The lights in the fellowship hall seemed too bright. I put a hand out and found the edge of the table, the plastic cloth cool under my fingers. Pecan crumbs clung to my palm. "I need air," I said. I walked past them, past the lilies someone had set on the dessert table, past the bulletin board with the sign-up sheets for Wednesday volunteers. Outside, the night air was damp and smelled like rain. I stood under the streetlight, breathing, slow and even, counting like the nurses taught me. Behind me, the door opened. Evan's voice floated into the dark, low and urgent. "If she won't sign at church, we do it at home." I closed my eyes and felt the world steady itself under my feet, but the steadiness didn't comfort me. It told me something else. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a plan. By Monday morning, my resolve had hardened into something solid enough to stand on. The humiliation at church had burned away any lingering hope that this was a misunderstanding. The way Vanessa had said vulnerable, the way Evan had nodded, it was the language of people positioning themselves, not helping. I'd spent most of Sunday night at my kitchen table, the one Mark had refinished in the winter of '94, pulling open drawers, flipping through folders, and setting aside anything that might matter. By the time dawn broke, there was a neat stack on the table: my deed, insurance, tax receipts, and the unopened letter from Mark's lawyer. The letter was last. My hands trembled, but not from fear. I slit the envelope with the paring knife I'd been using for 20 years and unfolded the thick cream paper. "Helen," it began in the lawyer's precise hand. "Mark instructed me to transfer the full deed to your name in the spring of 2009. He also asked me to establish a trust in your sole control. If anyone, family or otherwise, attempts to force a sale or transfer, the trust gives you complete authority to refuse without legal penalty. Keep this letter and the attached documents in a safe place. Attached was the trust agreement, signed and notarized, Mark's strong, looping signature right beside mine. My throat tightened. He'd known. Even before the heart attack, even before Evan's first failed business, Mark had known there might come a day when protecting the house meant protecting me. I called Maggie. She'd been Mark's closest friend and had worked in a law office for 30 years before retiring. When she answered, I said, "I need you to come by and bring your reading glasses." She arrived in under an hour, wearing her old leather satchel like a badge. I slid the documents across the table. She read in silence, nodding occasionally. "This is airtight," she said finally. "And here," she tapped the second page of the trust. "This clause makes it a felony for anyone to coerce you into signing the property over. That's elder financial abuse, Helen. Prosecutable." A slow heat spread through my chest. Not anger this time, but something steadier. "They think I'm cornered," I said, "but I'm not." Maggie's mouth curved. "Then let's invite them into the corner." We spent the rest of the day planning. She'd be my legal presence. I'd be the calm, compliant hostess. Let them walk right in with their folder of tricks, and then we'd show them the fine print. On Tuesday, I called Evan. "Come over tomorrow," I said. "Both of you. We'll have coffee, talk things through." He sounded relieved, maybe even smug. "Glad you're ready to be reasonable, Mom." I didn't answer that. Wednesday arrived sharp and bright. The air with that bite it gets before winter commits. I set the coffee pot to percolate, laid out cups, and arranged the dining room so there was nothing between my guests and the truth but their own assumptions. Maggie waited in the kitchen, her satchel on the counter, glasses perched on her nose. At exactly 2 o'clock, the crunch of tires on gravel announced them. A black SUV slid to a stop. Evan got out first in a pressed shirt and jacket that didn't quite fit right. Vanessa followed, sleek in cream, her hair pulled back so tight it seemed to lift her eyebrows. Behind them came a man in a navy suit and a woman clutching a leather-bound planner. I opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," I said, smiling just enough. Vanessa air-kissed my cheek. "We brought a lawyer," she said, nodding to the man. "And this is Carol, a financial advisor." "Of course you did," I said, stepping aside. We gathered in the dining room. Vanessa laid her folder in the center like it was a crown jewel. "Before we start," I said, my voice even, "I want to be sure we're all clear about what's at stake." "That's what we're here for," Evan said quickly, sliding the folder toward me. "Good," I said, "because I brought my own counsel." From the kitchen doorway, Maggie stepped in. The click of her sensible shoes on the hardwood was the only sound for a beat. Vanessa's smile faltered. "Helen, what?" "Maggie Bennett," she said, extending her hand to the lawyer. "Retired paralegal, representing Mrs. Ward in this matter." The lawyer blinked. "Representing?" "Yes," Maggie said smoothly. "We'll be reviewing your proposal against existing agreements regarding the property." Evan's brow furrowed. "What existing agreements?" I reached into the neat stack I'd kept on the sideboard and pulled out the deed. "This one," I said, laying it in front of him. "Mark transferred the house to me in 2009. Sole owner. My name only." Vanessa's eyes darted to the lawyer. He picked up the document, scanned it, and set it down without comment. "And this," Maggie added, producing the trust agreement, "a living trust, giving Mrs. Ward full authority over any sale or transfer, and making coercion a criminal offense." Carol, the financial advisor, shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't aware of—" "Of course you weren't," Maggie cut in. No one bothered to ask Helen what protections she already had in place. Evan's voice was tight now. "Mom, we're not trying to coerce you." "You brought a notary to church," I said quietly. You talked about me moving before winter. You had strangers walking through my kitchen. You've been in my cedar chest, my closets, my files." "That was for your safety." Vanessa started. "No," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. "That was for your plan." The lawyer cleared his throat. "In light of this trust, any attempt to proceed would be ill-advised." Maggie leaned forward. "Not just ill-advised, illegal." She slid another document across the table. Vanessa's disciplinary record, from her real estate days. Interesting history. Multiple ethics complaints, suspensions. Makes this whole picture even murkier, doesn't it? Vanessa's cheeks went blotchy. "That's irrelevant." "It's entirely relevant," Maggie said, "especially if this ends up in court." Evan's face had gone pale. "Mom, you just assumed I was too old, too tired, too grateful for company to notice you circling," I said. "You thought kindness meant weakness. But I've been living in this house long enough to know how to shore up a foundation." Vanessa pushed back her chair. "We don't have to stay here and be insulted." "No," Maggie said, "you don't. But you should take this as your only warning. One more conversation like Sunday night, one more uninvited walkthrough, one more document slid across a table without legal review, and I file a complaint for elder financial abuse, and I will win." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the tick of the kitchen clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Evan looked at me, and for a flicker of a second, I saw my boy, 10 years old, scraped knees, eyes wet from some playground injustice. But then it was gone, replaced by the man who had walked into a hospital room with a pen and a plan. "I guess we're done here," he said finally. Vanessa gathered her folder like she was rescuing a child from a dangerous place. They walked to the door without looking back. The lawyer and the advisor trailed after, murmuring to each other. When the SUV crunched down the driveway and disappeared, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maggie was smiling, small and satisfied. "That," she said, "is what holding your ground looks like." I walked to the window, watching the leaves scatter across the lawn. Mark and I had seeded by hand the first summer we were married. The air smelled like cold earth and something freer. "They'll be back," I said. "Maybe," Maggie allowed, "but now they know the cost." I turned from the window. "Good, because I'm done letting anyone treat my life like it's theirs to manage." And in that moment, with the late lights spilling across the dining table and the trust papers still in plain view, I knew something had shifted for good. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was ready. The silence after they left was its own kind of music. For weeks, the air in this house had been tight, full of footsteps that didn't belong and voices that didn't soften when they should have. Now it was just me and Maggie, the tick of the clock, and the faint hiss of the coffee pot keeping itself warm. I slid the deed and trust papers back into their folder. No triumphant slam, no dramatic locking away, just the quiet certainty of something that would always be mine. Maggie poured us each a cup of coffee, the way you do after a funeral or a wedding, when the storm has passed but you're still catching your breath. "They didn't see it coming," she said, her voice low and even. I shook my head. "They saw what they wanted to see, an old woman who could be nudged into a corner. Not anymore. Not ever," I corrected gently. "They just didn't know it." We sat in the kitchen for a long time, steam curling up between us, saying nothing. Outside, the wind moved through the maple in the yard, shaking down the last stubborn leaves. I thought about how, every fall, those branches looked bare for months, but come spring, they never failed to bloom again. By late afternoon, Maggie left. I stood in the doorway, watching her car disappear down the road, and then I went about my evening as I always had, fed the cat, watered the plants, stirred the soup simmering on the stove. The phone rang just as I was ladling the soup into a bowl. Evan's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," he said, and there was something new in his voice, thin, frayed. We should talk. I think we just did, I replied. A pause. You blindsided us today. You came into my home with papers I never asked for, Evan, I said, keeping my tone steady. You tried to hand me over like I was a piece of property. I defended myself. That's not a blindside. That's balance. I was trying to help you, he said, but it sounded less certain now. I know you think that. But help that isn't asked for isn't help. It's control. He didn't answer. I heard the faint sound of traffic in the background, a horn blaring somewhere far away. I'm your mother, I said softly. That will never change. But being my son doesn't give you the right to take my choices away. Another long pause. So that's it? You're just going to keep everything the way it is? Yes, I said simply. Exactly the way it is. When he hung up, I set the phone down and let out a slow breath. I didn't feel giddy or vengeful or even triumphant. I felt right. 2 days later, a white envelope arrived in my mailbox. My name written in Vanessa's neat, almost schoolteacher handwriting. Inside was a short note. Helen, we won't be pursuing the house anymore. I hope you understand our intentions came from a good place. Vanessa. There was no apology, but there was an ending, and that was enough. I placed the note in the same folder as the deed and the trust, not out of sentiment, but because paper trails matter. Then I tucked the folder into the locked desk drawer, where it had lived for years. That Sunday, I went back to church for pie night. The fellowship hall was warm, the smell of cinnamon and butter filling the air. Ruth waved me over, pressing a slice of apple pie into my hands before I'd even taken off my coat. I heard about Wednesday, she murmured. People talk. I'm sure they do, I said, smiling faintly. She studied my face. You okay? I am, I said, and I realized it was true. Halfway through the evening, the door opened and Evan walked in alone. He spotted me across the room, and for a moment he just stood there, holding his coat like he wasn't sure whether to stay. I nodded to the empty chair beside me. Pie's good tonight. He hesitated, then walked over. Ruth excused herself, giving us a little space. We ate in silence for a while, the clink of forks on paper plates the only sound between us. Finally, he said, You've always been stronger than I thought. You've always been stronger than you think, I replied. He didn't look at me, but I saw his shoulders loosen just a little. We didn't talk about the house. Not that night. Maybe not for a long time. But something had shifted. Not back to what it was, but towards something new. That night, back at home, I walked through each room slowly. The light in the hallway fell the same way it had for decades. The smell of my garden herbs drying in the kitchen was still sharp and green. In the parlor, the mantel Mark and I restored caught the lamplight, warm and steady. I stopped at the dining room table where the trust papers had sat just days ago and ran my hand across the wood. This house was still mine, not because of a document, but because I had chosen to protect it. I opened the locked drawer one last time, took out Mark's letter, and read it again. The words were just ink on paper, but they felt like his hand on my shoulder. Protect the house, no matter who tries to take it. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope, then returned it to its place. Before I closed the drawer, I added one more thing, a note of my own. Nothing legal, nothing formal, just a single line written in my handwriting. Some things aren't for sale. I locked the drawer and walked away, the sound of the latch clicking into place carrying through the quiet house like a promise. A week later, I woke to the sound of rain on the roof, the kind of slow, steady rain that seeps into the ground and makes everything smell clean. I lay there for a while, listening, letting the quiet settle over me. The last few months had been loud in ways I couldn't always name, voices raised just enough to sting, footsteps that didn't belong in certain rooms, the hum of worry under every conversation. But that morning, there was only the rain, the old clock in the hallway, and the faint creak of the house breathing with me. I got up, wrapped myself in Mark's old cardigan, and padded to the kitchen. The cat wound around my legs, impatient for breakfast. Outside the window, my garden was still holding on to the last of the marigolds. Their gold heads bowed under the water, but not broken. That's how I felt too. Bowed, but not broken. Over the next few days, I moved through my routines with a kind of deliberate slowness, sweeping the porch, deadheading the roses, kneading dough for bread. Not because I was avoiding the past, but because I wanted to feel the weight of the present. Every step in this house felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized was slipping away. I saw Evan once more that week. He came by alone. No papers, no proposals, no Vanessa. Just him, standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets like he used to when he was a boy trying to work up to an apology. We didn't talk about the house. We talked about the weather and the garden and the apple pie cooling on the counter. He stayed for a slice. When he left, he hugged me longer than usual. I don't know if it meant a change in his heart, but I knew it meant we weren't done being mother and son. Sometimes that's enough for now. Vanessa didn't come back. I didn't expect her to. Some people only see homes as numbers on a ledger, and when you take away the potential profit, there's nothing left for them to visit. I didn't feel the need to punish them or tell the whole town what they'd tried to do. The truth was its own kind of light, and light has a way of finding the cracks. One afternoon, Maggie came over with a stack of seed catalogs. We sat at the kitchen table flipping through pages, circling tomatoes and dahlias like schoolgirls planning dresses for a dance. We talked about the spring, about which colors would look best along the fence line, about how I might finally try peonies. It felt good to talk about what could be, not what might be taken away. I realized, somewhere between the heirloom carrots and the Shasta daisies, that I wasn't just protecting a house, I was protecting the way I wanted to live in it. Full of care, yes, but also full of choice. Because that's what people forget. Freedom isn't always about going somewhere new. Sometimes it's about being able to stay exactly where you are. The rain came again that Friday night, heavier this time. I made a cup of tea and sat in the parlor, watching the drops slide down, the glass. The lamp threw a warm circle of light over the mantel. The same mantel Mark and I had sanded down together, hands stained with dust, laughing over some forgotten joke. I thought about how close I'd come to losing the right to decide what happened to this place, about how easily someone can mistake quiet for weakness or love for permission. And I thought about Mark's letter, tucked safely away. His words had been more than instructions. They were faith. Faith that I'd know when to stand firm, even if the people I loved didn't understand why. Family can be complicated. People you'd give your last dollar to can still test you. People you've raised can still try to raise themselves up at your expense. But sometimes, if you hold your ground without bitterness, the lesson lands in places you can't see yet. Spring will come again. The marigolds will give way to tulips. Then the roses will climb the trellis Mark built. Evan might come around more, or he might not. Vanessa might soften, or she might keep her distance. Those aren't things I can control. What I can control is the way I hold on to what matters. I can keep the porch light on for the people who come in love, and the door closed to those who come in greed. And I can choose every single day to live in a house that still feels like mine. Not because the papers say so, but because my heart does. As I finished my tea, the rain slowed. I got up, crossed the room, and stood at the front door. The air outside was cool and sweet, carrying that fresh smell only rain can bring. I thought of all the years in this house, the laughter, the repairs, the storms weathered, and I realized something simple. Home isn't just where you live. It's where you refuse to be moved from before you're ready. I closed the door, turned the lock, and whispered to the quiet room. Some things aren't for sale.